All right, so good morning here. As promised, a presentation a little bit further around the notions of school finance and some of the ways in which we um, do the calculations for school finance, and some more explanation on that. And I'm also going to open a discussion board on Canvas, so if you have additional questions, you can ask them there, and I'll respond to those, and we can continue this conversation over the next little bit of time um, uh, while we don't have a class period devoted to this. So here we go. So a little bit of review. Remember from what we talked about earlier that school districts are guaranteed a foundation amount per student from the state. So the state has decided that there is a fixed amount that every student in the state should receive. And how this amount comes to the school is a mix of both local and state dollars to ensure that each child receives the same amount of money. So it doesn't matter whether you live in a property poor district or a household poor district or a household rich district. The state says that you should be receiving the same amount of money in terms of ability to be educated. So in a district with an abundance of property value, the state support is smaller, right? Because the local ability to raise dollars is higher, so their portion of that pot is higher, and what the state makes up on the difference is smaller amount, and vice versa. If the district doesn't have a lot of property value and can't raise a lot of dollars, then the state fills in a larger amount for them. And so this is this mix, and so it's not like we can say the state's going to provide 60%, the local's going to provide 40%. There's some statewide averages, but in general, it varies from district to district. So continuing on this foundation amount is used for operations. So remember, we talked about operations, and the big part of this is salaries and benefits for all personnel, administrators, teachers, custodians, everybody. Supplies, utilities, insurance, and a host of other things are included in these operations pieces. And those other types of revenues, local communities can generate, I'm sorry, if that foundation amount, the amount that the state guarantees for each kid, if the district decides that's not enough for the level of services they want to provide, then they have to go to their local communities and put forward a levy for an operations levy. And some of you talked about in class about threats against sports programs and extracurriculars, and those would be things that would have been put in play if an operations levy had failed. So the basic calculation for Ohio property tax is the assessed value, we'll talk about what that means, times the tax rate, and that equals the tax levy. So assessed value. The assessed value of property is the portion of the true market value that can be taxed. So you buy a house, there's a portion of that house that is taxable, and that taxable amount is known as the assessed value. And so you can think about the true market value as what you would buy if you were to buy the house from the current property owner. What would that cost? So if the property has a market value of $300,000, only a portion of that $300,000 is taxable. And in Ohio, that taxable portion is 35%. So the first 35% of the value of a home is taxable. So the formula then for assessed value, AV, assessed value, is 0.35 times the true market value. So here's a couple of examples. We have house one. It has a true market value of $150,000. The AV, the assessable value of that house, is $52,500, right? $52,500. House two is $200,000 more expensive. It's a $250,000 house, and that house produces an assessed valuation of $122,500. So now let's talk a little bit about tax rates. So we have AV. The next part of the formula for calculating property tax levy is the tax rate. So the Ohio tax rate is described in a unit called a mill. A mill is equal to 1/10 of 1 penny. All right, so this is 0.001 is a mil. So basically every $1,000 of assessed value, 1 mil generates $1. So $1,000 times 0.001 equals 1. Right? So you can think about that combination. $1,000, 1 mil is $1. The next slide will show how much a 20 mil tax rate generates for the two houses that we discussed earlier, 150,000 or 350,000. So, all right, so levy calculations. So house one, total market value, 150,000. Assessed value, 52.5. 20 mil tax rate. So the levy calculates this way, right? And that house produces $1,050 in levy. Our $250,000 house, the information we had earlier, same tax rate. So we plug in the 122,500 assessed value into our formula, and this house produces $2,450. So this comes back around to this rich versus poor districts. It's often thought that household income is the marker of a district is rich or poor. And in many ways it's true, but when we discuss tax revenues, the measure of rich or poor should be measured in the total AV, the total assessed value within the district. For example, two neighboring, as I talked about earlier in class, we have two neighboring districts, very similar in size, very similar in median household income, but radically different in AV because of businesses and the things that happen with those locations. When you have only houses and farmland, quite honestly, your tax base is much smaller than if you have businesses. The great thing about businesses is that their facilities have high property value, and they produce no students for schools, right? So this is a win-win. High AV, no students to educate. A house, you expect there's some AV to that, obviously, but you also expect that house to then also potentially produce students for you to educate. So a quick slide here on charter school funding. It's important to remember that charter schools are conceived as a public school and therefore receive state support, right? So a charter school is not a private school, it is a public school, and so they are funded with the same foundation principal amount. So if we have a charter school with 100 kids in it, we have 100 times the foundation level of state support coming to our school. And this funding is a direct substitution. So if a student leaves Bowling Green schools to attend Toledo School for the Arts, Bowling Green receives one student less foundation level, and that foundation level then is transferred to Toledo School for the Arts. So even though the overhead, one student leaving doesn't reduce Bowling Green's overhead, facility costs, principal costs, one student isn't going to reduce a teacher cost, or any of those types of things, that one student's dollars fully leave the district. All right, so additional questions. As I said, I've got a discussion board that I'll open on Canvas, and you can submit any further questions you have regarding school funding. Thanks.